Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the latest installment in CSBA's series of webinars examining COVID-19 and its impact on schools and how our local education agencies are responding to strengthen schools and support students in this time of crisis. Today's event is called Small Districts, Big Challenges. We could have called it Small Districts, Historic Challenges because these are unprecedented times. But despite the challenges, school districts, particularly our small school districts, are working against great odds to provide distance learning to students and to reopening schools in a way that supports students and community. We want to dive deeply into this topic, so we're not going to waste any time, but we do want to go over one housekeeping detail so that you can all participate in this event. That involves how to ask a question. Most of you should see a module, a tool, on the right-hand side of your screen. On that tool, you'll see a number of dark gray menu bars. Towards the bottom, there's one labeled Questions, which has an arrow pointing to the right in front of it. If you click on that arrow so it's facing downward, that will cause a box to expand. You can type your question into the box the same way as you would for an email or a text, hit send, and staff will receive that question behind the scenes. We probably won't have time to get to every single question, but we will try and answer as many as possible because we know you have a lot on your mind and we want this to be as interactive as it can be. But there are a lot of issues to explore and we're going to get to those right after we hear a few words from CSBA's CEO and Executive Director, Vernon M. Billy. He's been very passionate about making sure that small districts are supported in these unusual times. And he's going to tell you a little bit about what CSBA has been doing and the importance of the work that you are doing for students. So Vernon, please take it away.
Thank you, Troy, and welcome and thank you to everyone for joining us today. And thank you for your leadership over the last several months as you've responded to the coronavirus crisis. I feel I can't say enough about the leadership of boards through this pandemic. You as board members have had to expand your universe of knowledge to things I'm sure you probably never had any interest in or even thought about. But you've all risen to the challenge, and for that, I think we and your communities are forever grateful. The discussions and decisions you're making are truly impacting lives in the most meaningful of ways, and there's no doubt about that. I don't know if you realize this or not, but your decisions, your actions, all the things that you do today to respond to this crisis will serve as a historical record and guide to future generations of board members that may face a similar crisis. So the work that you're doing right now is truly important, particularly in our small and rural communities. And this is part of the reason why we wanted to host this webinar today. Today, we've assembled several of your esteemed colleagues to share their experiences and ideas in responding to this crisis as leaders in small and rural communities. It is our hope that today's dialogue not only encourages you to get through this crisis, but provides you with some solid approaches to responding to the many issues associated with reopening schools during this pandemic. As Troy alluded to, CSBA has been working really hard to represent all of our members at the state level. And we've been doing this not only with the legislature and with the governor's office, but also with business. One of the things I'm sure we're going to talk about later today during the webinar is broadband and internet access in our small and rural communities. And this is something that we've been working very aggressively behind the scenes with some of the cable providers and internet providers to help gain greater access and connectivity to our small districts and rural communities. So we'll talk more about that later, but again, I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing and thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to listening to your colleagues today talk about their experiences and sharing some good practices and thoughts with you today. So thanks again, and with that, Troy, take it away.
Thank you, Vernon, belatedly. As you mentioned, school boards are dealing with a number of critical issues, many that you have never dealt with before, but we've tried to boil those wide range of issues down to a few major categories, which you see before you. The first of those, of course, is student achievement. That involves distance learning, which everyone is focused on now. We'll talk about technology access. Vernon mentioned what CSBA is trying to do to increase student access to broadband and to computer hardware. There's also the teacher training piece, which doesn't get quite as much attention, but we want to delve into that because it is important. Equity and accountability has to be foremost. That's always a concern. But as we are in these difficult times, there's a risk that our neediest students could suffer even more. And so we want to prevent that to the extent possible. And we'll be talking about how districts are addressing that issue. Operations, people have seen that the services and programs that support learning in the classroom are so critical over these last several months. So we'll be talking about those areas, health and safety, scheduling changes that districts may have to make to accommodate for a late start or the fact that students aren't on campus in most places. And we'll also be talking about those value-added services that districts provide, which are really part of making a functioning school: the nutrition, the childcare, the transportation. There's been a lot of scrutiny on those issues now that people are beginning to understand their impact. Community relations is more critical now than ever. More people are looking at schools than at any time in recent memory and are wanting to be involved and engaged in the decision that governing boards are arriving at. So we are going to explore that in depth as well. And the people who are going to be helping us investigate these issues today are Vernon Billy, CSBA CEO and Executive Director, who you just heard from in his introduction. I'm Troy Flint, Chief Information Officer here at CSBA. I will be moderating the discussion, and the panelists who will be providing the insight for the rest of the presentation are Craig DeLuz, a trustee at Robles School District here in Sacramento County. John Gordon, also a trustee in Sacramento County at the Galt Joint Union Elementary School District. Kathy Spate is a trustee at Carruthers USD in Fresno County. She made a great effort to join us, going down to the district office to make sure that she had a strong connection. But even still, there have been some technical difficulties. That really underscores one of the issues that we're talking about today, is the lack of access to broadband internet in many of our small and rural communities. We're hopeful that Kathy will be able to join us by phone at some point to overcome this. But that really shows what our students, who probably have even fewer resources, are going to be grappling with, and underscores how much we need universal broadband access in this state. Someone who knows about that is Mike Walsh. He's a CSBA past president and also on the Butte County Office of Education. And last, but certainly not least, we have Abigail Solis, a trustee in the Early Mart Elementary School District in Tulare County. So now that you know who you'll be talking to, let's get down to business. Before we get into those categories that we discussed earlier, we want to talk about an issue that's foundational, that really provides the backdrop for everything that our schools are trying to do, and that's state and federal support. We're really interested to know from our panelists, from an education perspective, what is your opinion on the state and federal response to COVID-19? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, has that support recognized the particular needs of small school districts, or has it just been a generic response that hasn't really met what you're looking for?
So I think I'll jump in on this one. So thank you everybody for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in with this, Troy, and if it's all right, and talk about a little bit of my thoughts on this, because I know sometimes board members are a little hesitant, but I'll go for it. And one of the things that strikes me as really critical right now is we've all figured out, we've been hearing a lot lately about how critical it is that schools are open to get the economy going. And I'm in complete agreement. And I will say right off the bat, I think I can speak for every board member who's present on this panel. We all want kids back in school. We want our teachers and kids in school. We want the band room open, the locker room, the classroom, etc. And that for us is where we'd love to be. But quite frankly, it needs to be safe. And I've just listened to while I was running an errand this morning, I was listening to the Surgeon General provide a PSA, as he said, you know, we want to get back to church and we want to get back to
I can't hear anything that they're saying. Did something go?
I'm having trouble here. There we go. No, they were saying that if we want to get back to church and we want to get back to school and we want to get back to work, he just kept reminding everyone that the most important thing we can do is socially distance and we need to mask up, etc. And that for me is a reminder that we want to do all of those things, but quite frankly, the need for testing. You know, I was looking at one suggestion said that the teaching staff should be tested the entire staff every 2 months. All of these things come with a cost. And we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years really making clear the disinvestment that's already happened in public education, and to consider that we don't have the actual funding from the state and the feds in order to be able to do the testing and to make sure everything is safe. That troubles me greatly, and that has me really far more irritated than I sound right now. For me, it's a very simple process. If you want us back in school that badly because we are that critical, and I think we are critical to getting the economy going, then provide us with the funding so that we can do all of those things that you say that we need to do. There's still a lot to be learned about what is safe, what isn't safe about this virus. And there's a great article in the Washington Post where there's a gentleman out of Arizona, especially in a small school district. This one connected deeply with me. He talks about, I'm sorry, but it's a fantasy in his opinion, the title of the article. But he had a small school where there's 480 students. And all the teachers were gathered together trying to do their best to work with each other during the summer while they were doing distance learning. And one of the teachers got sick and passed away from it. But 2 other teachers who she was working with closely are also sick. At which point the superintendent is trying to figure out, you know, this is a very real situation for me. There are lives on the line. How do I manage it? So for me, it just comes down to, I would be far happier with the federal response and the state response if the financial support, the fiscal support was there, so we could practice all the safe regards that we're being asked to do.
You know, I'll chime in now as well. One of our biggest concerns was when the first shutdown first happened, it just really seemed like we didn't know a whole lot. So it seemed like for many, the best thing to do was to just, in not knowing, the best thing to do is to be cautious and close down for a period of time, despite the fact that at the time, no nationally recognized epidemiologists or virologists were recommending short-term closures of schools. And in the end, it turned out that we wound up closing longer term, which even based on the advice of the CDC was at least one thing that could help slow the spread. My concern is that over the last few weeks, as we were brought together and said, okay, we're going to now, we need to now make a decision. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Was really the lack of data and scientific information that was being provided to us, whether it was by our county or by the state, to help us make those decisions. They were giving us recommendations, and that's fine. But I wanted to see the data and the science supporting those recommendations, because every math class I ever took, I was told, show your work. And I wanted to see the data and the information so that we could make good decisions. Okay, who's getting it? How are they getting it? I mean, we've hired contact tracers all throughout the state in order to help us to understand who's getting it. What are the hospitalization rates? Who's winding up in the hospital? What are the mortality rates looking at? So that we can make decisions that will best line for our students and for our staff, that can best line up with the data and the science. And sadly, the state of California has just done a very, very poor job of providing us as policymakers, because we are policymakers as school board members, with the data we need to make decisions. They're making these recommendations and we're supposed to take them at their word. But, you know, once again, all I see is the governor making proclamations, I don't necessarily see health experts at the statewide level providing with the recommendations and the data. It's been a real concern to me.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in here. You know, I think to answer your question, there is a huge difference between the response at the state level and the federal level, I think, as you all can imagine. You know, what we've been hearing from Betsy DeVos is absolutely appalling, that we should just jump into reopening schools at full capacity, or even any version of that, in my opinion, is the most irresponsible thing that a district can do. I am a little more reassured by the state's response. You know, if you're like myself in a community that's a hotspot county where we have continued to see increases in our COVID cases throughout the last few months, and there is no sign of that slowing down. The governor decided for us, right, that that it was safer to not reopen in a traditional setting, but instead reopen with distance learning, because if it's not safe enough for our businesses and churches to be open, then it's not safe enough for our students to be in school, right? So I do appreciate that in our situation, we were not tasked with making that extremely difficult decision. However, I will say that the decision is consistent to what the community was already saying to us and where they were leaning. Before we made the final decision, we conducted 2 surveys. We polled the community, we polled parents, and we had an overwhelming response of almost 70% of parents felt that it was unsafe to reopen. Again, we are a hotspot community, and they were not willing to send their kids back. In terms of resources, let's just be honest here. Small disadvantaged communities, underserved communities, small districts, we didn't have enough before the pandemic. So imagine the situation that we're in now, right? We are what, 47, 48 in state and funding in the nation. That's shameful. We should have more funding. So we didn't have enough before. Imagine how we're supposed to try to make it work now. So do we need more funding? Absolutely. I'm not satisfied with the response that we've received from our state, but I do want to recognize that it is better than this response from our federal government.
Well, I'll just say that the information we got from our community is from both our staff, our certificated and our classified, as well as our community was significantly different. They trusted us to make that decision, but they did want to see some sort of a return, whether it was in a hybrid model or a full return. I was excited because we had the full support of our staff, whatever the decision was that we were going to make as a school district. Once again, my biggest challenge in particular is just the data and the information that's provided. And when I look at it in particular from the state level, quite frankly, I think it's a decision that we as school districts need to be able to make. That's just my perspective. Or at the very least, if you're going to make the decision for us, you need to provide us with the information and the data that supports that decision, which the state of California, the governor of California, just absolutely did not do.
So there's no shortage of passionate opinions on the quality of state and federal support, and I wouldn't expect anything less from the people on the ground who are making these tough decisions. Most of those decisions are being made to enhance student achievement, and we're doing that in a far different context than we've ever experienced before. And probably the biggest difference for most districts is distance learning. I want to talk about the challenges you are experiencing as you prepare for distance learning, and specifically, how do those challenges differ from those of larger districts? We talked briefly in the beginning about the big hurdles that many small and rural districts have to climb and in terms of providing effective distance learning. And I'd love to hear you illustrate how you're trying to grapple with that.
I think one of the first things that many small districts are dealing with is capacity. We simply do not have the same people power as larger school districts. I have, I have a superintendent and I have 3 administrators. And as Abigail mentioned earlier, with the funding, limited funding, we've had to cut half of our assistant principals, we've cut our coaches, we've cut other support staff that would normally provide some level of support. So we have fewer people on the front end carrying a much larger load in terms of what is this going to look like. And another challenge that we're dealing with is not having the right type of tech support when you're moving into distance learning. While we have specialists that can respond to repairing and dealing with glitches. We really need tech specialists, people that are innovators that are going to help us move to what does this look like, doing this online. And the other thing that's really difficult for us as a small school district is professional development. That's an area where, again, without having people support to provide that, and whether there's an opportunity through maybe a buddy system with a larger district, but everyone is working around the clock, or whether perhaps the county office of education can cluster up smaller school districts, but without support, we're kind of it's very difficult to say the least.
I'm mindful of the single school district, as in a principal who is also the superintendent, also the cook, also the playground repair person. And so I've got a lot of those districts around me, and in our part of the woods up here, as everybody refers to as out in our neck of the woods, we have a lot of the counties around us are in the same situation where you've got that small school district that is literally rural and small, one person doing 6 jobs. And so a big challenge is, like you said, capacity, the ability to be able to do all of that, like John was just talking about. And then a huge piece of the problem for us is out in the mountains. And I think, Kathy could probably speak to this one as well, like Troy alluded to, the challenge with making sure the internet speed existed. Well, I've got some areas where internet does not actually exist, okay? And I used to live out in those areas, and even when we were able to solve that problem, it was still spotty and intermittent at best. And so for us, the broadband access is incredibly limited. Some folks come down to the school parking lots, 20 to 30 miles, get to the school parking lot and do their work or connect. And in some cases, that's even the staff, who the only way they have access is to come into the office, to the school site. And that's a huge challenge for us. The cell towers just don't exist. And we're not talking about schools that are that far necessarily from the locations like Chico. Chico has the college campus, and you would expect them to have internet, broadband access, no problem. Well, there are schools, or rather students, who live 10 miles away that they don't have internet access, or they have trouble with getting that access because they're off into the foothills. And so for us, we could really use some type of a robust internet system that actually allows for the distance learning, as well as then we can start to focus in on more of the professional development. But right now, our biggest struggle is how are you going to get that information to a kid that's 6 miles away, not 30 or 40, but just 6 miles away into the foothills, where suddenly cell reception or internet is no longer really feasible.
Mike, thank you. I don't want to step on top of you, but the overall, and I'm having feedback because I've got 2 computers going here, so I'm going to shut this one off. I apologize. As you can tell, there is lots of trouble in my life today about getting internet connectivity. Are we all going to laugh? Yay!
Yeah, we're all laughing.
I would be clapping if you could see me. I came to the district office so that I'd have better connectivity, and then now I have a computer problem, nothing to do with connectivity here in my office, the district office. I think that for us in our 102 square mile district, we have 4 feeder schools that feed into the high school. One of them is unified with us, but those little other 3 teeny tiny little districts are probably having as big a problem or worse than what we're having here at the high school and at the elementary school in Carruthers. We have a large group of our students who live in our little unincorporated community, and we are, we can get hotspots to them. Most of them don't have internet. We have 70% of our kids who arrive on buses, and they live out in the rural areas, and we're going to be sending home hotspots and devices with all of them, and hoping beyond hoping that we can actually connect to a tower that may or may not exist in that 102 square mile area. So the challenge is not going to go away. It's going to be ongoing for this year and beyond, because how long is this going to happen? So assistance, have we gotten the assistance we needed? You were all talking about that previously when I wasn't here, but I don't know if we've gotten the assistance that we've needed. I'm not going to pick on any particular state or federal or anybody, but we are woefully short on cash to be able to do the things we need to do, because the cost of internet hotspots is going to be extremely impactful to small and tiny districts because of the ongoing monthly costs. And so it's going to be a tough year for student achievement, but we are ready and willing to do it at Carruthers. So
one of the things here in Sacramento, it's Sacramento County, all the schools, districts, superintendents have really worked really closely together with the Sacramento County Office of Education. And so to a certain degree, in terms of some of the technical expertise, that's really helped with economies of scale. And a lot of the districts, neighboring districts, have been helpful when we've needed either assistance or things like that technologically. We were luckily in a good position where we were actually in the process of expanding some of our digital and some of our technical footprint with our students. So we were actually already prepared to go out and purchase additional Chromebooks and whatnot. We made sure that every student had at least one Chromebook at home. If they had multiple students, they got multiple Chromebooks. It was a little bit of a challenge if there were more than 2 or 3. But we made sure that everyone had connectivity. A lot of our staff really work together, and it's one of the things about a small district is everybody has a tendency, even though we have our defined roles, we have no problem to a certain degree stepping outside of those. So we had enrichment teachers who are also, help teaching technology. Well, they've been able to help us with some of the technical stuff because we have a very limited technology staff that can't meet every student's issue when they particularly need it, but they've been able to be there and be significantly helpful. We have the benefit, unlike some of the smaller districts, we're in the city of Sacramento, so we have some of the issues of a rural district, but not all of the issues of a rural district. So once again, having those partners, in particular those neighboring school districts in close proximity, has really been a blessing for us.
So I think
Troy's trying to. You want to say something?
Yeah, just real quick. Everything that all of you are saying today, from my perspective, this is why it calls for leadership at the state level. It calls for a vision at the state level from our elected officials to develop and help build out not only the technology but the infrastructure, so that we're not having this conversation 10 years from now, right? Or even 5 years from now. I mean, obviously this is going to take some time, but we need a vision and we need some leadership from the elected officials at the state level to say, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to help our small rural communities and working with the private sector companies to build out the infrastructure. So you're not having to worry about, oh, I got to get a hotspot over here, or I got to get a hotspot over there. I think as we think about education in the future, regardless of this pandemic, this is a necessity. It is a requirement, and you as boards shouldn't have to be trying to figure out how you're going to get access to your students in the 21st century. I mean, to me, this is to the equivalent of getting a man on the moon, if you will, right? We have to put that type of thought and investment into all of our communities to ensure all of our students have access.
But the other thing on top of that, Vernon, is that distance learning is not putting what we did in the classroom into a digital format. It needs to look differently, so that there's this whole other piece in which you don't have people to innovate. You don't have, the ability to use technology programs to kind of scaffold something that's more complex and more engaging for students. And that's, as a smaller school district, you're way on the bottom end of that. You're just trying to get something up and running. It's difficult.
I agree. I wish there had been something over the summertime to provide something available to our staff to help them be better prepared to do distance learning come the fall. What we went through the last few months of the school year was just, okay, we're going to figure this out on the fly. We're literally going to, build the boat as we sail, or build the plane as we fly. But now we're in a situation where it would have been nicer if we had a little bit more lead-in time to be able to say, okay, to provide some sort of professional development for our staff to help them to know, okay, this is what your lesson plan should look like. This is what your availability to your students and to their parents should look like. This is how, this is what distance learning should look like. Even still, for the most part, and once again, luckily we have the ability to work with the larger districts in our area to see what they're doing and pull some best practices. But for the most part, we're still kind of making it up as we go.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, Craig, and it leads naturally into our next question around assistance that small school districts could use. Before we jump off to that, I just want to let our members know about a few things that CSBA is working on and could actually use the support of our members in putting pressure on the legislature to advocate for. The first of those is Assembly Bill 570 by member Aguiar Curry from Winters. And that would require the California Advanced Services Fund to promote a number of topics, including remote learning and telehealth. And the legislation would also require the Public Utilities Commission to prioritize projects that expand broadband access so that it reaches the greatest number of unserved and underserved households. So what that essentially means is this bill would require the Public Utilities Commission to prioritize and direct more money to those projects in our underserved and unserved neighborhoods, many of which all are the small and rural school districts. So support for AB 570 is something that CSBA would appreciate from its members. We have a support position on that bill, and there are 10 co-authors, so it has some legs, and that's something that could really be a difference maker down the road for small and rural districts. There's another piece of legislation, Senate Bill 1130 by member Lena Gonzalez from Long Beach, and that would require the PUC to encourage deployment of what they call 21st century ready communications with a goal of approving funding in the next several years for infrastructure projects that would greatly expand broadband access. So there are a couple of really promising bills. Those unfortunately are not going to help you in 2021, but they should change the landscape in terms of getting us closer to universal broadband access if we can. And then we're also advocating federally. We've been in communication with the Speaker of the House and other legislators federally, emphasizing that the next relief bill needs to have specific funding for broadband access particularly for our rural areas, but also for underserved areas and metropolitan regions as well. Sorry to interject, but I think it was important to make our members aware and to encourage them to contact their legislators to support those bills. But back to the idea of what assistance can small school districts use in terms of implementing distance learning models. And John, I think you went ahead to the next question, which is great, the training and professional development piece. How do we support that? So it's not just distance learning, it's effective distance learning where we're getting good instruction, not just doing the same thing we did in the classroom online.
I know Abigail wanted to say something. She's ready to jump in, so I'm going to defer to her.
Oh, that's okay, John. Thank you. I think I'll just go ahead and respond to the question and share a little bit about what my district is doing, as well as the situation in my small school district, as well as the surrounding districts. I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it, that this pandemic has exposed the vulnerabilities in our most disadvantaged communities throughout the state. Vernon mentioned earlier that we, CSBA as a whole, has been advocating for some sort of legislative support on connectivity. And yes, we've been doing that for years. And I have to ask myself, why does it take a horrible situation like this for elected officials to start paying attention to the disadvantaged students in the state and in this country? And I have to say, shame on us for letting it get this bad. And the reason why we're scrambling is because we have swept this issue under the rug for far too long. Internet access is a basic right. If you cannot do school, if you cannot apply for a job, if you cannot access healthcare because of lack of internet, then there is a fundamental issue there. So I had to say that. But we luckily in my school district, we have been able to develop a option that will assist community residents who do lack connectivity. You know, in our community, there's two reasons why internet is a barrier. One is because broadband access simply does not exist. You know, the towers are not there, like Mike mentioned earlier. You live so remotely out of town that you can't get a connection. And then the other reason is because when you can get a connection, it is just far too expensive. And we have families that are paying, you know, $100, $200 for the minimal connectivity. It's almost like dial up. That's how slow it is. And they're paying $200. It's absurd that our neediest communities in this state are paying more for a less quality internet access. And we should really be paying attention to that problem. But to address what our school district is able to do, we have been able to provide a strong internet signal within our district to our schools and to our you know, our dwellings, our buildings. We decided to implement what we're calling the antenna project, where we're opening up our schools Wi-Fi and making it available in throughout the community by purchasing and installing two antennas on the opposite ends of town. So essentially, the communities will be able to tap into the school district's Wi-Fi and use internet that way. So between a mixture of those who have their own internet at home and those who are able to access the school district's internet, we're hopeful that we'll be able to cover all students and that every student will have some sort of reliable internet to be able to do their online learning. But I do want to say that not all small districts are able to do this. You know, I know of districts just, you know, 5-10 miles down the road that don't have that secure signal for their own schools, let alone to be able to share with the community. And like I said, this has just exposed the truth. It's been far too long, and we really, even as we get past this issue, it needs to continue to be at the forefront of our mind.
You know, I want to say ditto to everything that everybody's been talking about, but what this does for me is it creates a challenge in terms of why are school boards and school districts suddenly having to become experts on internet service and cellular towers, et cetera. That's not our job. And it just points to me part of why I'm really frustrated that this hasn't been talked about, or something hasn't been done with it. And so kind of, you know, as you alluded to, Abigail, you know, why hasn't it been done? Because it's something that a lot of folks have been able, in Sacramento, I'm going to point to Sacramento for right now, they've been able to ignore it because they don't have the communities in the mountains and the foothills where I live, where we can't ignore it. And so this notion of resources now, where I've got admin, you know, administrators across this northern part of as we call it out here in the North State, I can refer to about 9 different counties, and we are all advocating. I've got admin teams now running around trying to solve a problem that some other company, Verizon, AT&T, whoever they are, it's their work. It's not the work of a district to figure out how do we do cellular anymore. We didn't figure out how to do landlines. Why all of a sudden are we supposed to figure out how to do internet and provide cellular towers? That's infrastructure that should have been designed and should have been taken care of by other individuals, other organizations. And yet it, once again, has fallen on the laps of educators, you know, because we need it and we know how important it is. Like we've been talking about 21st century education. Well, if it's 21st century education and it's that critical, then let's make it part of everybody's opportunity. This goes back to that equity thing. Equal opportunity. I just want the opportunity for my students in some of my most remote places where I've got a school district that has 50 kids or 100 kids. I want them to have access so that they can understand how to participate in 21st century work and be prepared to be constructive members of society, et cetera. And this is something that everyone else has been able to ignore because it didn't quite hit them like it has now. But I do want to give credit to, like, I think what you were saying earlier, Craig, is that the teachers and the staff, they deserve credit because, like you said, we didn't know whether we had to shut it down or not, but we shut everything down. And just like that, everybody figured out how to get one-to-one devices in kids' hands. If they were already working on it or not, suddenly all hands on deck. Let's just get the devices out. And one of the things that we've done at our county office is we have an ed tech department, and they started thinking about what are we going to need to do to support the districts around us. And they just started putting together the lessons in the professional development. We have it stored online because we know that they couldn't necessarily watch it in real time. So they have access to it once we solve some other problems. But the biggest challenge for me still exists. Look, we're putting in infrastructure that is not what we should be doing. So that's a resource, that's time that administrators and staff are now focused on instead of the job that we're supposed to be doing around educating kids.
But
So,
this is part of a larger issue though, Mike, because culturally, when schools reopen, who's going to be the health professionals? We are. And so this is just a smaller thing of a larger problem, which I'm not sure how we're going to be able to shift that around, because schools education shouldn't be the burden of a lot of what you said. I jumped in front of Abigail. I'm sorry.
So Mike and everybody, I'm sorry, because I'm not on screen and it makes it a bit harder. I just want to put in that you talk about it at the state level, if this is an issue. I think this is a federal issue. I think this crosses all state lines and all social economic areas. Being able to connect to the internet is, as Abigail was saying, it's so important to everything that is happening and in our country, whether it's as an adult or as a student. And so reaching out to our federal representatives in Washington, and I know that there's some things happening there, but it's happening so slowly. We needed this on the 15th of March. And it's going to take much longer than we can even imagine to get the real civil rights problem that I feel that this is solved. Because this is the worst situation to be in, and not have connectivity for our kids when this is the only option for us to educate them for probably the next 9 months. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we're going to get from the feds and from the state to help us with this. And we're working hard. All districts around us, their teachers are so creative and so innovative. I'm super proud of all the teachers that I've talked to and all the things that I've heard, and I'm sure all of you are too. They are just miraculous. If they're just given the opportunity, they will. And I know they've been working overtime. We can't pay them enough this year. We cannot pay them enough. So I think
also it's important for us. I mean, we need to understand that technology and access is a part of our infrastructure. Our connectivity within our communities has got to be part of the infrastructure that is part of that plan. And that's, quite frankly, that's not federal, that's more state, that's more city, that's more county. And once again, we have to start planning as we start planning communities, as well as addressing the needs of already existing communities. Infrastructure, in this case, digital infrastructure, has to be a part of that. We need to be making those particular demands. And sadly, in California, we have not invested in our infrastructure the way that we should. The way that California used to invest in our roads, used to invest in our school buildings and whatnot. We don't invest in it like that anymore. And so we need to start making sure that as we go forward and as we plan, this sort of, once again, infrastructure is part of the process.
Yeah, I just want to mention that there are more affluent communities and more affluent school districts that really aren't struggling this way. They didn't have to scramble to get themselves ready on March 15th because they were used to traditionally offering an online a model of instruction. It is those more disadvantaged, underserved communities that are scrambling. When we're talking about lack of resources, we're talking about the same communities that are dealing with a housing crisis. We're talking about the communities that are dealing with no sidewalks, bad roads, contaminated drinking water, air you can't breathe, substandard housing. It's all these same communities. And it's not just the state, it's not just the federal, it's these big companies like Verizon and AT&T, when they make their decisions about where to put their towers, you know, they much rather put up a tower in San Francisco or in LA where they know there's lots of customers versus a smaller community where they feel like the investment is not worth it. And you know, it's a shame because our students, our teachers, our community, they are worth it. And it's about time that we all realize that we deserve just as much as the rest of the state and the rest of the country.
I couldn't agree more, Abigail. In the meantime, though, we are going to have to take extra measures and figure out ways to mitigate learning loss for all students, but especially those high-need students who haven't received the resources or the support that they need. So we touched on this, but I think it's worth exploring more deeply. What measures are your districts, or in Mike's case, the County Board of Education, doing to mitigate learning loss overall? And especially, what are you doing to mitigate learning loss for those high-need students who may require a little more help?
For us, you know, one of the advantages we have a couple of charter schools that we actually have partnered with that are in our district that actually focus on distance learning. And so being able to have that sort of a partnership close by to be able to get information from, to be able to get some best practices from, has really helped speed up the learning curve for us. That's been a big part of it, not being afraid to ask for help and look to people who are already doing what it is that we're looking to try and now get into. Once again, getting the assistance and going to whether it's neighboring districts or businesses in order to get the resources that we need or get the information that we need. At least that's what we've been doing at ROBLA.
At the county level for us, one of the things that I think we're really trying to focus on is how do we use our paraprofessionals, those instructional aides, to really support some of that, especially at distance learning, and especially with students who require special help, extra help. What do we do with those folks? They're staff, they're available, they want to help. We don't necessarily have them in the classroom right now because of the distance learning. So how do we restructure their focus, their work, so that they can be more effective in helping support? Because we don't have students coming to us. So now, especially in a county out here like this, one of the models we've often looked at is how do we go and deliver the service, because oftentimes those families struggle to come in anyhow to receive service. So we're looking at the model of how do we go out to those families, how do we go serve them, and then how do we also increase the support that our districts are asking for in doing the same thing. We realize that they are, again, we've got a lot of those school districts out here where 2 instructional aides work for across 6 different grades, and they're just trying to figure out how do you move them around. Well, they need some support as well. So we're trying to figure out how do we restructure the paraprofessionals rather, so that they're able to go out and deliver the services.
I know for us, part of our plan includes probably more screen time for some of those high need students. But I would also offer that we may need to rethink who exactly are our high need students, because typically you would think special education or ELs, but I would also say, families that have essential workers in the home is a segment of the population that are high needs. Our primary students that are learning how to read and learning how to write sound words, they're a high needs group, because doing this via distance learning is much different than doing it in person. And even as some of my colleagues were mentioning too earlier, when you have 3 or 4 students that are in under one home and they're all streaming devices at the same time, and they're maxing out their streaming, there's bound to be just disruption. So that's another potential segment of the population that we may have to look at and say, they're high needs. We need to do something extra or something different to address.
And as you say that, John, it just occurs to me, I have that conversation with my grandchildren whenever they all come over and everybody's got their own devices out. I've been kicked off of several Zoom calls because of them. Shouldn't you guys be outside playing in the yard or something? Yeah, but it's that for me, and I think of what you said, as you have several places, again, I've got a lot of homes out here as well, where there are 2 or 3 families living in the same house. We know that that's going on across the state and across the entire nation. We get that. And that becomes a challenge. That is a critical point of just being able to say, I don't want to penalize a student because they have several families living in the house. There's nothing right about that. I want to figure out how do we support that child. So again, we're back to that equity, back to equal opportunities. And in some cases, it's the geography that's just so difficult to get around that you've got to figure out how do you work around that distance and the up and over the creek when the weather turns bad. And good Lord, let's pray we don't have any other disasters that are going on. Right? This is fire season, and what happens then when we've got to go and add dealing with that on top of dealing with the things that we're trying to do right now during the pandemic. And so yeah, I think you're right. It's we have multiple families. So once again, how do they get access to some of the technology how do you keep the broadband going? And it's not that people are being greedy or being silly. It's this how do you do just even the basic stuff just to keep them going and being educated.
In our district, we are trying to, we are not trying. We have set up a schedule so that every day it will be the same distance learning class schedule as when we return to the classroom for at the elementary and at the high school, so that there is consistency between the sitting in front of the computer and when they return to the classroom. But we have provided and set aside one day a week that will be targeted to our special needs areas in particular. We'll spend a day working with EL students, and we'll, all the staff will be concentrating on those kids who need special interventions. And I'm proud of what they've done, and we're small enough that'll work for us. And hopefully it will, the teachers will have enough time to be able to pick out those students who need the extra help because they've fallen behind because of what's happened since when we closed in March. But we're blessed that we're small enough and that the teachers, I believe, will be able to connect with all of the kids well enough to be able to pick out who Johnny and Susie are, who need the extra attention, and then put them into those categories and spend extra time with them on that one day a week that they're calling for. So that's what we're doing in Carruthers.
So it's clear that all our panelists have been taking this issue seriously and trying to find creative and resourceful ways to support students, particularly our highest need students. But it's something that not only individual school districts, but people at a state and federal level need to prioritize by providing additional resources and guidance and support so that locals have the tools to do what they need to do in service of students. Beyond what's happening in the classroom, there are so many other ways that school districts are supporting students and families, and that's become more apparent during this crisis as more people have awakened to how critical schools are in areas as basic as making sure that families are eating, or that people have proper transportation, or that childcare is available so people can go to their jobs and earn the money they need to keep a roof over their head. So we're going to explore that. But before we get into those topics, another area of service and operations that's very critical and on everyone's mind regards health and safety. At some point, who knows when it will be, most school districts will eventually go back to school. And so we're curious to know, how are your school districts stocked for PPE, for custodial supplies, sanitation stations, other things that you need to do to try and maximize health and safety when on-campus instruction does resume in most of the state?
So I'll jump in again. I got to stop watching TV or something because I was watching the Today Show this morning, and Kentucky, University of Kentucky, they're going back and they've got this super model of you walk up, you tell them who you are, they give you your student ID number, and they scan your forehead and they swab your nose, and then in 48 hours later you find out if you've got COVID or not. And they're planning to figure out, we're going to test our students every 2 or 3 days is what I believe they said. And I was looking at that thinking like, what? Where do you get the extra bodies to put that in place? And we could never do something like that. We're, unfortunately or not fortunately, I'm not sure which it is, we have a couple weeks because we are one of the counties on the list, right? The big list that you don't want to be on. So we are definitely distanced to start with. So we're not quite as concerned about PPEs right this moment. That's only a 2 to 3 week, maybe a 4 week delay. I'm hoping at best. It's 4 weeks later, we can start moving kids back into the classroom. We had all of our hybrid models ready to roll. And that's when those all the equipment is going to become important again. And I think that we're going to have the same problem when all the districts are going back in mass finally. That's when we're going to start to see the shortages of supplies. And one of the concerns that we have in our county is that some folks are, I'll be nice right now and say that some companies are a little too optimistic about their ability to deliver on those supplies. Right? Everybody said, oh, no worry, we'll be able to get toilet paper. That didn't show up for a long time in a lot of stores. And I think this is going to be the same challenge, is my concern anyhow, that it's going to be the same challenge, in that once we go to start purchasing all of those supplies and gathering up everything, when we go to resupply, I think everybody will be fine in the beginning, but all the kids that show up for school who I didn't remember to bring my pencil, my backpack, my mask, we're going to have to keep providing them. And I think that's when we're all going to start to feel the pain, is we made it in the beginning, but now the supplies are empty, and whoops, my school district now needs to order another supply. We're running low. John's school district is trying to order the same thing. Craig and Abigail and we're all trying to order. And then Kathy calls and says, but yeah, I need to order too. Well, Mike's on backlog and he was the first one in. What do we do then? Do we shut it down one more time because we can't be as safe as all the recommendations, or just what? So a lot of heads nodding, so I'll give everybody else a chance to talk while I breathe.
Mike, I want to chime in here, because you talk about us as smalls, and smalls, we don't get to the front of the line when it comes to ordering. We are put at the bottom of the stack often when it comes to things, because they're going to take care of the LA Unifieds and the Fresno Unifieds because they offer a bigger bang for their shipment cost or whatever. That's just the way life is. And so hopefully we will get together and order in groups at small schools or something, so that we can bypass those issues. I see Abigail shaking her head yes, and if I
love that idea,
I'd be going yes, yeah, good girl. But it's, it's just so frustrating. So hopefully right now we're set. We've got everything we need in Carruthers. We're ready to go. We've ordered UV lights, special UV. Oh my gosh, lost my words. So stuff that will go into every classroom, we'll have it so that it will treat and de-germify, get rid of the germs in the room each day. And we have foggers, and we have other equipment that we're ready to go with when the kids are back on campus. And boy, we are waiting for that 14-day for us to be off that wait list, so we can count those 14 days so we can get our little people back in their seats and do what they need to do. So we're excited. We're planning ahead, and you're right. We're gonna have a supply chain problem in the future, but maybe we need to all work together and bypass some of the crazy. So. But thank you.
I also think pre-planning is I think a big part of that. I mean, like, it's in terms of like a lot of the devices, digital devices. What really helped us was that we were already in the process and planning and had the resources to purchase additional. I think now, as you talk about those things, because excellent point, Mike. I didn't think about that. So we need to be thinking ahead of time, not waiting until we need them, but planning ahead, anticipating the need, in other words, getting in that line early before there's a long line.
Well, I think, and the other thing is, I think at one time my district may have been prepared, but just recently they made that change to where it's third grade on up now will likely have to have face covering. So that throws everything, completely off, I think, for a lot of districts who may have had good planning back in June. And now it's a whole different ball game, and that's pretty good, Mike. The other thing is looking at protocols. I know some of the discussions we've had in my district was, are we going to take temperatures before they enter, come onto campus? And some of the initial conversations at the time were probably not, because you have a single point of entry, and this was designed in response to school shootings and school security. You have a single point of entry, and it's going to take an extra long time. And so from that perspective, I think you have to rethink about how many points of entry are you going to have in for maybe a short amount of time to help get kids, students through it, if you are going to, take temperatures. That's going to be, a really big challenge. And the other challenge is, as we've seen a lot of parents in the past drop off sick kids because they have to get to work. So what does this look like in the age of COVID, when there is a lot of fear and a lot of concern, and mom and dad are dropping them off at the doorstep, and schools, are they going to put them somewhere? Are they going to reject them? Those are going to be very hard decisions and hard discussions, as we have already seen in terms of our communities, some having very difficult conversations about to wear or not to wear face coverings.
Well, that, we just to let you, so part of our reopening plan was, in fact, that's part of it, is how do we, if we need to quarantine students, if they come and they are either showing symptoms and or they have a fever, that's all been part of our planning process. And it really, like I said, what really helped with us was having staff members at every site, at every level, a part of the planning process. When you have that many people, questions come up that you may not think of or that I may not think of. And so we've been able to then kind of address that in the plan. Now, we won't know until we're in the midst of implementing the plan whether or not our planning was appropriate, but at least we've been able to try and address as many questions as we can in the planning process.
Craig, I totally agree with you on that. I think that, as I was saying earlier, I think our teachers and our staff members are going to adapt with great finesse as things happen in the way, we've got our opening plan. We know we're going to do the temperature checks. And all the things that are on the list that they have worked with administration to put together. But I think they'll turn on a dime. I think they're going to figure it out, and we all are, and the parents are going to go, but it was that way yesterday. Well, but this is what works today. And I think educating our parents is going to be the biggest things. The kids and the teachers and the administration we're going to change. They're going to change, and we're going to support that as board members. We're going to support what happens. It's the parents who are going to go, but Johnny doesn't like that. It's going to be, they're the ones who are going to have to get used to the flow. They want normal, and it's not going to be normal. It's going to be really different, right? I liked your up and down. Perfect analogy, Craig.
Everything that you're talking about, it keeps coming back into my mind, like, who's paying for all these supplies? Oh, yeah. Who's going to come up with the money for that? Then I'm back to, didn't we start this with a conversation about how they responded? Yeah, I'm right back there again with federal. When I think about that model that University of Kentucky has in place, for a school district, a small school district, to be able to do that, even the notion of cost and the notion of bodies, because now I've got the whoever was doing the morning yard duty, well, now they're showing up a little bit earlier, and now they're doing the morning check-in. Then they go take a 5-minute sit down and catch their breath to go do the first recess, to go catch your breath, go work in the classrooms, and then go back. Well, now you've got to pay somebody for that extra time. So as a district, I can understand taking the cost of paying for that time, but all those supplies, I just can't see that being mandated. Again, here we are back to those unfunded mandates, that you can avoid that by saying it's highly recommended. Well, you might as well call it a mandate. And at that same time, that's a lot of expense that's now coming out of the classroom, right? And so for me, I think that's all part of the big challenge is all of these things are doable, but they all come at a great price. Sometimes it's the human labor, sometimes it's the actual financial price. But there's a price involved every way you look at this.
Well, we haven't even talked about how anyone would be able to enforce social distancing. I mean, that's just a nightmare in itself when you're dealing with, young people. Adults can't, enforce themselves or regulate themselves with social distancing.
Yeah, I saw that Troy has moved on to community engagement, so I just want to make sure to chime in here quickly as we're still talking about services, and maybe offer a little bit of a different perspective for school board members who are joining us and listening in. I think it's very traditional and responsible for us to be worried about student achievement and be talking about things like Wi-Fi access and things that come to mind when we think about learning and successful learning. But I also think it's equally important that as school districts, as board members, we are also considering other services and other needs of our students. One thing that our school district did is we hired a couple of psychiatrists because we we know that kids are stressed out right now. They're dealing with a lot at home. Think about a student who perhaps has a parent that has been exposed to COVID. Maybe they're feeling anxious or overwhelmed because a family member is sick in the hospital. Maybe they're dealing with job loss, in the home. And beyond that, we also need to be ready with all of the resources that we're going to need when things come up. For example, if you have a family who has a parent that's been exposed, that parent has to quarantine for 14 days. So what happens to that student? Do they have to leave the home for 14 days? The school district should be ready to offer them temporary housing, temporary shelter. You want to go back to school, expect parents to come at you with everything you can possibly imagine, right? Students are hungry. Students need meals. We need to be able to provide that. All of these services that perhaps we haven't talked about, and I like to refer to them as social emotional services. I know this whole topic is about reopening schools amongst this pandemic, but there's a lot of other really important, critical things happening in this country in this point in time that have a lot to do with racism and bigotry and much other things that we're not talking about, but our students are not blind to this. Our students have access to social media every day and see people killed on social media. And they're dealing with all of these things together with the pandemic. It's a lot. We should be prepared to address some of that.
Abigail, I love that you brought that up, because one of my biggest concerns in my work that I do when I'm not a school board guy, 15 minutes a year, the work that I actually go do is around this notion around welcoming, engaging cultures and climates of schools. And one of the thoughts that I've had for the last few weeks is adults are having a difficult time handling these conversations in a civil, anything that resembles anything around civility. A lot of those kids are going to know each other's story. And so I know that your family lost somebody. Well, so my family we lost our business that we've been trying to build for, it's been our family for however many generations. We're out of business now. We're hungry. We're not sure how we're going to feed. All of these things are going to become the boiling point that I'm hoping schools are prepared for when it comes to mental and health services. What are you prepared to do? Thank you for bringing this up, because it's a critical conversation for me. It is part of how do we take care of the child when they get back, because if adults are struggling across the nation to have this conversation, whether it's about racism or if it's about economics or if it's about health, those kids are going to come in. I repeated what my mom and dad, what my grandparents said. That was what I heard, so that was what I talked about. And if that's what's happening at home, that is what I'm going to talk about when I come to the school. I hope teachers are prepared. I hope counselors are prepared and districts are ready to how do you walk kids through those difficult conversations. It just isn't about the adults in the building anymore. This is also going to be about the students at every grade level. They're all going to be talking about this because it's happening all the way around them, especially when we're shutting the school down, we're bringing the school back up, we're sort of in a hybrid version of it, all of it. So, and I don't even recall, Troy, what question we're supposed to be on. I think we just kind of took over. You're welcome to drive us back into alignment. So
no, I mean, that's an important issue that needs to be discussed. There's so many layers to supporting students, and it doesn't always fit neatly in boxes. And a couple other ways in which school districts are supporting families and students involve transportation, nutrition services. The child care component is critical and fraught with issues. So if you could touch on how your school districts, or in your case, Mike, the county board, is addressing those topics.
We have decided that we figured out how to feed kids when we close the buildings, and we're going to just keep figuring that out. We are going to support our districts with food. We're going to feed. We're going to support our districts. And the transportation part will be interesting because we don't do the transportation, but I know that our districts have already figured out their travel schedules, like the AM in the morning, and it's almost like kindergarten. We're going to transfer these kids in the morning, and we're going to run these kids in the afternoon, and we've got to figure out who can sit on the bus together because they're family, and who do we space out? And at this moment, I'm thankful I'm a county board guy. I'll let you district folks talk about the nightmare of the scheduling for that. But we have decided, we are clear, we're going to keep feeding, and we're going to keep supporting the districts as they feed, however that looks, whatever it takes.
Mike, what we're going to do at Carruthers, we're in a, like I said, 102 square mile district in southern Fresno County. We have 70% of our students who are bused. We have chosen, when we do open, to putting children in the seats. We will not be running our buses. Yet all the while, we are still paying those same drivers to be available for when we do put our buses back into service. We are going to see how many kids arrive and whether or not parents are able to. It's not going to be a normal 5-day-a-week schedule where mom and dad can drop them off and pick them up at the end of the day after work. So they will have to be making adjustments in their schedules, whether they're bused or not. So that's sadly the direction that we're taking to start with when we get back to classroom. And feeding them, we're going to go on doing that. That's being supported by staff and community. And when school starts, there will be 3 meals a day for most of the students when they are back in class. So our after school students will get after school meals as we have. And so that's going to be ongoing. So we figured that out quick. I was very proud of our staff and our community. And so that is continuing to go on even now. So I think in childcare, that is a very big, broad, open question. And I don't even want to step there because it is a very difficult thing. Our teachers will be bringing their very own students into the classroom when they come back in. All of our teachers will be required to be on campus each day. But once our kids get back into the campus, come back to campus, then their students will have to either go to their classroom if they attend our school or be in daycare someplace else if their district isn't open. So that's a difficult thing to take on, and so I'm out on that conversation. Sorry. Thank you.
I don't have too much. Oh, go ahead, Greg.
No, I was just going to say ditto. It's pretty much what you both echoed is pretty much what we're doing.
Yeah, me too.
All right, then let's move on to the discussion of instructional models. People have become familiar with terms like cohort or hybrid approaches that they never heard of a couple months ago. So preparing for the eventual return to school, what sort of instructional models are your schools considering?
I tell you, in Galt, we are located between Elk Grove and Lodi, and we've had probably 14 cases between May all the way through June. And there was really a lot of talk about going back into the classroom. It seemed like, there were some possibilities. And then when everything opened back up, we spiked tremendously. We're a town of about 30,000. We have just under 400 cases. We have twice as many cases as the city of Folsom, which has the population size is almost 3 times as large as Galt. So obviously, we're talking about hybrid and we're going, we're going to distance learning. But, I think one thing that the conversation about reopening schools, I think it's a little bit misguided. I think we have it wrong. I think that the conversation for a lot of us needs to be, getting to a point of reopening the boardroom before you reopen the classroom, because you have to model what that behavior looks like, what the normal looks like. And it's really the giggle test, right? Because if we're still doing Zoom calls with board meetings, what is that message saying to our teachers, to our students, to the parents? And how do we get to a point of where it is safer? What does that look like to slowly come in? And I think that's why the student waivers are really important when we can get around to them, because especially with the high needs students, can you get maybe just a group of 5 and a teacher or an IA and start really small? Because I think we can learn a lot from looking at restaurants and what they have gone through. They open and they takeout only, then they open, now it's takeout only, now it's outdoor dining and again, smaller groups. And so there's a lot for us to learn from, but we really need to talk about the boardroom and how are we conducting our business and modeling what our business, how we're conducting that versus how we expect the business to be conducted in a classroom.
Well, you know, and I'll say, so for example, what we do is we have a hybrid model even with our board meetings. Those members who are either at a high risk, who are part of a high risk population or have someone at home who's part of that high risk population would call in and do Zoom. Those board members who are not part of that, who are not considered high risk, would still show up to the board meetings in the boardroom. They would exercise or practice social distancing. But once again, like you said, it's modeling what works. One of the reasons why in the very beginning I harped so much on having the data is because it's important to know, okay, so if most of the hospitalization cases, most of the serious cases are those who are 65 or older, or 60 or older, or 50 or older, then maybe as we look at, okay, what teachers are going to be, because we're offering both a hybrid model where students are going to come to school part-time and they're going to come in 2 different groups in order to be able to have enough room in the classroom to socially distance, and then be at home 3 days a week. But we're also offering parents the opportunity to have their students just do distance learning. But in terms of determining who's going to be doing what, it'd be helpful to know, okay, who are our high-risk staff? Who are our families who have people who are high risk at home? And as we make the decisions and we inform our families to make those decisions, we can give them the data and say, you know, we know that grandma and grandpa live with you, and it might be better to have your students just do distance learning so that doesn't put grandma and grandpa at greater risk, right? When we know the information, one of the reasons why they've noted that the number of deaths haven't gone up significantly with the spike has been because one of the reasons they noted was people with more information are making different choices. Those who are higher risk are not going out as much. You notice most of the new cases are those who are 18 to 39. Having that data and having that information doesn't just help individuals make better decisions, but it helps us to make better decisions. And then we can make our plans to do the best we can to protect both our staff and our students.
So for our district, sorry, Abigail, I apologize. We are meeting as a board. We have always met in person every month since we closed. We have a large board room, and so we all social distance. And I think for us, it was setting an example to our community that we trusted the process of social distancing and respected that. So that I'm confident that that's a good example for our community. Delay, there's also on the screen here that did we delay school? Yes, we're starting school 1 week later this year because we are spending a whole extra week with teacher training and working together in collaborative groups at grade level, and so that everybody can be on the same page. They're going to have to learn a whole new computer program for connectivity with the kids, because everybody's going to use the same platform. And so that is an adjustment. But then when we do come back to school in the classroom, the teachers and the students will be on the same schedule, as I said earlier, that they are every day. And so we'll have half our kids in the class and half the kids out, but the half that is out will be online, engaged with their fellow classmates in the same classroom at the same time. And I don't know how the teachers are going to do that, but I know they will make it possible. So it's going to be a really interesting, and so we're ready for all distance, and then we'll go to hybrid when we're able to get back in the classroom.
A lot of rich information on this topic. I'm sorry, I'm just going to try and have to move us along a little bit more quickly because we want to hit all these topics, at least in brief. So I'm wondering if any of you have made changes to your schedules in terms of starting the year later or extending it, or are you looking at summer school, weekend school, other options to perhaps make up for lost time or learning?
1 week for us later, and then we're working with professional development to adjust the schedule so the end of the school year isn't changed too much.
Yeah, we're starting on time. We're sticking to our schedule. However, our antenna project is not up and running today, which is the first day of school. We start pretty early in August. Yeah, we had our welcome back breakfast virtually this morning. So we do anticipate that the antenna project or access to internet will be about 10 days behind, but we do plan on using this week and next week to do some sort of orientation with students and teachers, and guide them and talk to them about what to expect. So we stuck to the schedule, but understanding that some kids may be limited to the virtual learning until the antenna project is up and running.
The county focus, we don't get a choice, right? Because the student group that we are working with, they're captive in some cases, and we're expected to work with them anyhow. So we haven't made any adjustments in that because our kids, they are on a different sort of a track anyhow, that a typical open and ending of school for most of our students doesn't really affect. And for our charter programs, no, we're moving forward with it. And again, we're on virtual, and then we want to get them back in as fast as we can.
So let's move on to community engagement. As we mentioned at the outset, this is perhaps more critical than ever before, with so many people focused on schools and so many changes from the normal way people are accustomed to schools operating. I think a lot of those changes and how schools are responding fall under the rubric or fall under the umbrella of the new local learning continuity and attendance plan, which is the current version of the LCAP for this year. So I'm curious to know, sort of in the context of the new LCAP, how are you involving stakeholders in your decision-making process and keeping them abreast of all these changes that are happening?
Craig, can't hear you.
While Craig is still searching for the button that will give him his voice back, I'll just say that we spent all of our time working with our districts surveying. I mean, and we surveyed the surveys even after we surveyed the surveys. we got a lot of feedback, and we did everything we could to incorporate that into our decisions.
One of the things that we had not been doing was we had never like broadcasted or streamed our board meetings before. So now that's something that we do, and it's a part of, and we make it a point to include community engagement as a part of that. We have a communications consultant that we had brought on a couple of years ago, and we've still been working with, and they've really helped us make a shift in terms of how we're communicating. They did a great job in helping us to put together a survey to help us better understand not just what our various different constituency groups were interested in and making sure got done, but how they wanted to see it get done and what help them to be able to prioritize those needs. But I think Mike hit it right. The surveys and asking a lot of questions, really pushing staff in particular during this past year to make sure that you were in contact with students and parents. We had teachers, we made sure they had office hours at a minimum twice a week during different times of the day to meet the needs of parents. Yeah, community engagement and making sure in particular people were connected to both their students and their families was a vital piece of kind of just how we've gotten through so far, and we're kind of making sure to weave that in the plans as we go forward.
And then I'll add this one last piece, and then I'll go back on mute for at least 30 seconds. We're also working with our public health department. Our county superintendent is working with the public health director and putting together the process. So we're working with them, because that's an important piece of this conversation for us, and utilizing all that other information, the feedback that we got from the parents and from staff, along the lines of a lot of things that everyone has already talked about today. That's all part of that process that we're trying to map out.
Yeah, I'd like to interject here. I think that all of the board members on this panel today and all of you out there, even before the pandemic, recognized the importance of community engagement, parent engagement. But during this time, just like many other issues that we've discussed, those things are even more critical, even more important to make sure that we engage with the community. And I think the reason that is because this goes really beyond schools. You know, when our students are not at home in front of the camera learning via Zoom, they're going to go outside to the store. They're going to go to, you know, the bus stop, and whatever rules and regulations or policies are being implemented or not affects the entire community. If you want to keep your kids safe, your teachers safe, your students safe, then the local the local stores need to be abiding by the same policies, right? We need to be practicing social distancing in restaurants and churches and different aspects of the community. That's why it's called community engagement, because we're all in this together. We can try to be super careful at school, but if as soon as students step outside of school, they have, you know, put themselves at risk, then when they come back to school the next day, they've put their teachers and their fellow students at risk as well. For that reason, it's very important to be engaging, you know, with your local health departments. One thing that's critical in California's Central Valley right now is the lack of education and messaging around COVID-19. We're seeing that in the most vulnerable communities, a lot of you know, farm working communities where perhaps English is a second language, there has been a complete overlook of providing proper messaging and education around how to properly social distance, how to properly wear a mask, and, you know, put the mask over your nose, right, not under your nose. You know, some things that to us seem like common sense because every day we're bombarded with this information. Well, if you're a farm working family who gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go pick grapes and comes back at 6 o'clock at night, you know, you're not seeing these same messages, and perhaps you don't know the best way to be safe. So you know, I've been working with our county elected officials and our health department to make sure that they're providing education and training to local business owners who have these small mom and pop stores, because that's where we're seeing a lot of the breakouts. So I will say that as a school district, please branch out outside of your district and engage with the community around you, because we're all in this together.
In our district, we are reaching out to our parents as we have since the beginning. We have a beautiful system where we can call all of the parents and the principal or a teacher can leave a special message, and then it will robocall until that parent is gets the message. And so we've been doing that. We were not able to do any internet access with our kids in the first, from March until when we closed school in June, because we didn't have enough devices to go around. We had devices, excuse me, we didn't have hotspots. And hotspots are, you know, that's the big thing. But so we send out letters with every packet exchange that we made with the students, and the teachers were reaching out to the students. So that was our engagement that way. We've talked to our ELAC and DLAC groups who meet regularly in our district. And we have a really good relationship with our community, and so they were reaching out to the principals and to the superintendent and saying, you know, we have an at-risk person in our house and we want to do homeschool all next year for our kids. What can you do to help us so that and make that possible? So we do have a number of students who we will not see in the classroom at all next year. Mom's engaged in the process, or dad is, and they're going to homeschool because they have the students at risk, or grandpa that lives in the house, or somebody's getting treatment for cancer. So we know about those people, and we're really glad that they want to stay engaged with us, and they know their kids will be back eventually. So that's, we're really, really lucky that we have a really good communication stream going around in Carruthers, and that's very helpful to us as a district.
And I wanted to touch on one more aspect of community engagement, which is engagement with employees and particularly the labor unions that represent school district staff. Does anyone have any experiences or stories to relate about how that engagement has gone as you've tried to shift the way that you work to meet the moment as far as COVID-19 response?
This is probably, you know, one of those rare cases where it's advantageous for smaller school districts. I know, well, I think we got a little survey fatigued out with some of our parents as we were trying to go in one direction, and the governor came out on a Friday. We've had teachers over the weekend start developing an MOU And within 7 days of the governor's directive, the board took action on the MOU. So we were really lucky in that respect, that because of being a smaller school district, that we're closed, a little more, tightly knit, in which we can have those conversations and get things done maybe a little bit quicker than maybe some of the larger districts.
We like to call ourselves the Robla family. And, when there's a crisis, even if you have issues, family comes together. And it's been really good because, like I said, as we developed our reopening plan, we had staff members from every area on every school site involved in the planning and involved in that process. And everyone came to it with the willingness to really be able to. They would say, look, they were not worried about, what am I going to get? They're worried about what do I need to do to help? And that's been a real phenomenal thing within our district. I want to say there's a program that we've been working through out in San Diego. It's a consortium, but it's where we meet once a year with our collective bargaining units and our board representatives, and we really do a lot of team building, and really work on bringing each other together. I'm mad because I can't remember the name of it exactly, but I want to credit the relationship that came from that has really laid a foundation for us to be able to hit the ground running, working with our staff in developing this plan and address the situation that we're in.
I think I need to echo John's remarks. Small school, small district. We are lucky. Community. A lot of our teachers live in our community or are actually raised here. So we have that connection, and we have an MOU. It took some negotiating because they had some things they wanted to do, and everything kept changing from the governor and all the county health department. Everything changed, but it was accomplished, and I think that is the blessing of being from a small district, and that the teachers are. I don't want to make this comment that they're more engaged, but I think they are. Because usually they own this. They own their positions. They own the responsibility that goes with it. And so they wanted to come up with an agreement, and they want to be able to get back to work. So that's the pleasure of being in a small district.
So I know we could go on and on. There's still so much material we haven't even touched on that speaks to the complexity of the challenges that are facing school districts and county boards, but just want to get in a few questions. We won't get to many of these today, but we will try and answer these questions via email. And want to remind everyone, we'll be posting a recording of this webinar on our website tomorrow afternoon, as well as a PowerPoint deck, which you can download and share with your colleagues or others who are interested in supporting students. But a couple of questions have been raised by the audience, and I want to get to just a couple of those. A number of people asked for more info on the antenna access project. So Abigail, could you briefly tell me how that came about, and if it's possible for other school districts to replicate that?
Yeah, I can share the basics that I know, and it's the general concept is that we would put up 2 antennas on opposite ends of the community and open up share our Wi-Fi and on our signal, and that signal will transmit to those who are able to connect to that antenna on opposite ends of town. I also know that it's about $100,000 and some change for each antenna, so it's about $200,000. And when you think about the amount of families that we will be able to serve, it definitely was a worthwhile investment, on our part. I hope that helps, and I'm happy to share more information maybe after with details.
Yeah, we could definitely provide more info offline. Another question that came up from multiple people involves mental health. I think some of our small districts were surprised that some of you were able to offer mental health support or psychiatrists. And so we got several questions that were some variation of how the heck did you get funding for mental health professionals. So if you could speak to that.
I know in our district, we didn't, that we wanted to maintain what we had in the mental health, whether it's the social workers or the psychologists that we've had before. And as a result, we've lost assistant principals. We've also lost some of our coaches, but to a larger extent, I think it's really important as leaders that we remember to hold space for our superintendent, our cabinet, our teachers, because they also have social emotional needs that sometimes are overlooked because we're so focused with the students. And so I wanted to make sure that that was kind of put out there, because sometimes when we're going through so much stress, it's good to check in with the superintendent and say, let's take a deep breath. How are you? And just really connecting with them to make sure that they can work to where they need it and that they're supported as well as our students.
One of the ways in which we were able to provide it was we had been a lot of that we were able to provide initially through grants that we received, that we applied for and received. And as we found that they were benefiting our students, even as the grants ran out, we were able to find ways within our budget to be able to maintain those individuals on our staff.
Yeah, I'll just add that before the pandemic hit, we were actually facing declining enrollment. We were in our third or fourth year of cost-saving measures, right? So doing whatever we could to cut here and there and save money. And we had made the decision that we were going to eliminate, a contract that provided social workers and some access to, a psychologist, because it wasn't in the budget. It was a very hard decision to make. However, this gave us an opportunity to see how important it is to actually have that in-house. And because we did get the CARES Act funding to cover some of the technology costs that we now have, we were able to free up other money to go ahead and actually hire a psychologist, as well as sort of restructure our current parent liaisons, whose job is to really be the voice, and communication person for each school site, as well as our counselors, and make sure that they're kind of providing beyond just academic support, but perhaps offering support, with that social emotional need as well.
So one of the things that we did for our county is we had this fire not too long ago, and just prior to that, we had a few other events happen. And so we've already been putting mental health for our students, and like you said, John, for our staff. We've been doing that for a few years now. We have a health clinic that we, through our JPA, that we put in Oroville and in Chico, and we're consistently sending out information regarding, here's the number to call, are you taking care of yourself? And we're providing the classes that say, hey, let's spend some time talking about what to do with stress and what it looks like. So we're doing all of those things, and it's a growth from what we were already doing because of the campfire and a few other challenges that we've had around the community, but it's nothing new for us. And so we're kind of fortunate in that sense. And Troy, you're on mute.
Questions we weren't able to get to today, and we are going to respond to those directly or through the FAQ section on our website. But out of respect for your time, we've already gone a little bit over, which we were happy to do because it was time well spent. We are going to move on today. You can direct your questions individually to us by emailing csba@csba.org. A lot of your questions are also already answered in our existing resources. We have a YouTube channel at youtube.com/csba video, where all our past webinars related to COVID-19 and school reopening and other issues of that nature are housed. So you can watch this webinar. It'll be up tomorrow afternoon, and previous ones as well on a wide range of topics related to COVID-19. And then even more resources are available on our dedicated COVID-19 webpage at csba.org/coronavirus. All our news updates are posted there. If you're looking for examples of what other school districts are doing you can find it there. We have an advocacy toolkit that you can use to contact your legislators and what needs to be done for small schools or whatever else your K-12 interests are. And so we hope you will take a moment to visit there. Thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon, and a big gratitude to our panelists. I know it's not easy with all that you have going on right now, so everyone is really thankful for you taking some time out. Before we go, one last promo. We have a webinar coming up this Thursday at 2 p.m. Strengthening the K-12 STEM teacher pipeline in California. It's hard to hire K-12 teachers in STEM in the best of times, and that's only going to be now that there's so much instability in public schools and the teaching profession. So for those of you who are really focused on STEM options, that's a great venue to look for. You can register at csba.org/webinars. You there or future. Again for your time. Take care and have a